Hi friends and Israel fans, come and join me in another episode of Israel with Moshe. We spoke about the land, we spoke about the size, we spoke about the borders, the dimensions. Now we want to talk about the demography, about the people in the land, the living stones, as we call them. In biblical days, there were times that Judah was with a whole lot of population. Unfortunately, there were lots of times where people were killed. People were killed by the Greeks, by the Romans. People were exiled by the Assyrians, by the Babylonians. There were always Jews here, even in a small quantity, even at the time that the land was Muslim, or the land was Crusaders, or the land was Ottoman under the Turkish Empire. There were always Jews living here, but never as independent. Jewish independence ended at the year 70 with the destruction of the temple and the Romans coming and destroying Jerusalem, and started again in May 14 of 1948 with the establishment of the State of Israel. When Israel was established in 1948, the total population here was about 600,000 people. That's not much, considering that during the War of Independence, 1% of those people lost their life in the War of Independence, 6,000 casualties. That's a lot when you compare it in percentage. But don't forget that a few years before, the Jewish world experienced a horrible tragedy, the Holocaust, where 6 million people were murdered. Think that if you would start the land with 6 million people, where are we going to be today? So we started with 600,000. Now, 70 some years after, we are about 9 million people in the land over here. When we say 9 million citizens, out of them, there's about 6.5 million Jews. The majority of citizens in Israel are Jewish. We have about 1.5 million Muslims, a few hundred thousands of Christians, and other minorities like Druze and others. That does not include the Palestinians that are topographically part of Israel, but actually they're not part of the state of Israel. So we don't consider them among the citizens of Israel. When you look on the map, we spoke before about the Arab countries surrounding Israel, but inside Israel, inside the borders of Israel, we have the Palestinian territories. Palestinian territories are those yellow spots that you can see here. This is called the West Bank because it's the western side of the Jordan River. And here in the south, this is called the Gaza Strip on the south part of the Mediterranean Sea. Those people are Palestinian. Now, we can open that to a whole big discussion about the origin, the source of the word Palestinians. The land was called Palestine during the Roman period. When the British came here, they took the Roman name and used the name Palestine to the land. So everybody that was born here between 1918 and 1948 was called the Palestinian. Of course, this is a whole lecture. We might do a lecture for the premium subscribers that will talk about the Palestinian issue and the Palestinian conflict. But here in the West Bank, the yellow spots and the brown spots within the yellow spots, those are Palestinian territories. There's about 7 cities that Palestinians have control over them: Gaza, Bethlehem, Jericho, Hebron, Kalkilia, Tulkarem, and others. There's about roughly 2.5 million Palestinians in the West Bank and about 2.5 million Palestinians over here in the Gaza Strip. Israel had an agreement with the Palestinians. It's called the Oslo Agreement, 1993, where we brought the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, led by Yasser Arafat, from their exile place in Tunis, brought them into the land, gave them control over those areas out of the idea that we will have a temporary agreement that will develop into a permanent agreement and maybe into two-state solution, into the state of Israel and the state of Palestine. Now, this never matured, and so Palestinians got control over the land, but then towards the year 2000, there was a series of fights between Israelis and Palestinians, and until today, there's a series of fights between Israelis and Palestinians. And so the Palestinians here, topographically, they're part of Israel. Actually, they're not part of Israel. They have their own identity, and we do not consider them among the number of citizens that we have here in Israel. And last, I want to say that people say, what's the origin of Jews in Israel? You were all Jews who came from Europe and moved from Europe because of the war? That's not true. In Israel, we have Jews from all over the world. We have European Jews, of course, who came after the Holocaust from Eastern Europe and Western Europe, but we also have Jews who originally came from Spain, moved into Arab countries, came from the Arab countries at the War of Independence, Morocco, Syria, Libya, Tunisia. We have Jews from Russia, we have Jews from South America, we have Jews from India, we even have Jews from China. And so we have people from all over the world. And again, this is one prophecy and one prophecy from the Bible that speaks about people from all over the world coming back to their homeland, and we're actually living to see it with our own eyes.